we'll move on, folks. The next item up is item 9, which is an update on the preparatory work for the Auckland Integrated Transport Plan. Welcome to the front, Robert Simpson, Manager Transport and Strategy. And this is part of the ongoing updates on that transport plan that we're trying to keep people up to date with. And I think there's been a presentation sent out, and Mark Lambert is here accompanying Robert. Over to you, gentlemen.
Kia ora koutou. Good morning, everyone. We have a brief presentation for you today. It won't take long, and then we'll hand it back to you, Mr. Chair. Assuming I can get this to work. Here we go. So the main focus today is really on the challenges and more so on the proposed approach that we are undertaking to assessing large-scale projects for this plan. We're continuing to work with Auckland Transport staff across all the different work streams that we've told you about in the past. I know you're well aware of this, but it's very important to reiterate this is a different process than the RLTP that you're going to be hearing about later on. RLTP has a 10-year focus. This has a 30-year focus primarily. Work has been last time we were here, we presented a 10-year map of the challenges. Work has been going on the 30-year challenges in the meantime. The thing about this, of course, is that there's numerous articulations of what the transport challenges are for Auckland, most recently in the LTP, and also the preliminary work, or the work undertaken last year with government on the first round of the integrated transport plan. So the challenge for us is trying to distill that into something that works for this process. And you see where we've got to there in that table. So these are the challenges that we're proposing at this stage. One around congestion and productivity, one around travel choices, one around climate, one around affordability, both for households and for the public purse, one around resilience, and one around the need for much better integration between transport and land use planning. As with the challenges, there are also numerous articulations of what the strategic outcomes that Auckland seeks are. So we're trying to bring that together into something coherent as well. And these outcomes that we've come up with have been informed by previous work that you've seen, as I say, through the LTP and through the work undertaken last year with government on the first round of the integrated transport plan. And you can see the 5 that we've come up with there. There's a lot of detail that we're still working through that sits underneath that to help with the assessment criteria. But essentially, these are the high-level outcomes that we propose to assess large-scale transport projects against. Supplementing that will be an assessment on kind of investment criteria around the urgency of projects and around their deliverability as well. I'll talk here also about how we intend to incorporate Maori outcomes into our assessment. Of course, we have a lot of information on this already from the hui between the Mayor and the Minister and iwi representatives last year, from feedback provided by iwi on the LTP and their future development strategy and various other processes as well, all of which we're trying to take on board and bring together in some way. So we have a lot of information on that. Through that, we know that these outcomes here are important to Maori as they are to everyone else, of course: climate, access to employment, travel choice. But there's a bit more to it than that. So we are working with Ngā Matarai, the Council's Maori Outcomes Advisors, coming up with a specific set of criteria that can articulate the Maori outcomes that go beyond what we've got there, as we might see in the Kia ora Tamaki Makaurau outcomes framework. So that criteria will be applied to projects, and will also be applied subsequently through the moderation process as well. So as I say, we're working with Ngā Matarai on that, and they will be involved throughout this process. This sets out some of the established statutory and non-statutory transport planning processes that we'll be drawing upon to identify major projects to be assessed. There's a sea of acronyms there. There's no need for me to go through them right now, but you can see that there are different processes and plans pertaining to different modes, and we have extracted from these processes a provisional list of around 40 to 50 large-scale projects to be assessed as part of this project. The important thing to take into account from here is that we aren't starting from scratch with anything. We're drawing upon existing work in these processes and others that have identified projects, so we're not starting, we don't have the ability to look at new project concepts for this phase of the work. And also, this is important to the RLTP, things that are already funded or proposed to be funded through the RLTP or already under construction are out of scope as well, because we're assumed they're already booked. So, what is the criteria that we use to identify specific projects as we went through all those documents? Well, as I've hinted, firstly, scale, things of strategic significance to the region and to the region's future. And that little diagram we've got there gives you a sense of that. So anything under a few hundred million is out. Anything between a few hundred million and $1 billion would only be in if it was proposed as an alternative to something larger, or if there's a major dependency between that and something larger. The ideal range of projects that we're looking at are between 1 and 5 billion, and there are plenty of them. And there are also plenty of projects that are north of 5 billion as well. And in that case, we are attempting where possible to break them down into component parts to enable kind of a more like-for-like, apples-for-apples type assessment. Really important to note that this doesn't mean that there's a whole lot of other stuff that's going on that's sitting outside of this plan that just because we're not assessing it doesn't mean it's not important or not happening. So you'll consider the RLTP later today, and there'll be numerous other RLTPs in the years to come. We're assuming that all those smaller scale investments, the business as usual investments, the annual program type investments will continue. So for example, active modes, we're not proposing to consider that as part of this work because there is no single project of a scale sufficient to meet our criteria. That doesn't mean that we don't consider that important. Of course we do. You know that we consider that important. It just means that it's dealt with through other processes. Likewise, you'll recall from the list of maps that we're developing, most of them are at the 30-year kind of scale. For active modes, it's at the 10-year scale, simply because we would expect that in 30 years from now, we would have a very well-developed active modes network that covered the entire region, and a map that set that out would just be a squiggle of lines. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. So as I say, applying all this criteria, looking at those documents and others, we've come up with a provisional list of around 40 to 50 large-scale projects for assessment. This is really a summary of what I just said. No need for me to go through it again. One of the important things that I haven't mentioned is data availability, and that's variable across projects. There are some projects where there's screeds of data, others where there's very little, and we're seeking that data from the relevant agencies with varying levels of success. And that, in some instances, that will inhibit our ability to provide a proper assessment where we don't really have the level of data required. Next steps. It's not on the slide, but I'll just give you a sense of our assessment processes, which will be starting, we'd hope to start this next week, but it's more likely going to be the week after now, simply because we need a little more time to gather the information, and we've already got a lot. We'll be having 3 to 5 assessment sessions of 3 hours each. They'll consist of subject matter experts from Auckland Transport and Council, using the criteria, or a more detailed version of the criteria that I've showed you. Once those are complete, there'll be at least 2 moderation sessions. One will be looking at it from a land use perspective, and the other from a Maori outcomes perspective. Subsequent to that, those workings will be taken to an oversight group consisting of Mark, myself, and various others from Auckland Transport and Auckland Council. And the output of all that will be a semi-prioritised list of these large projects for your consideration. Sitting alongside that will be an estimation of what we think might be a reasonably expected funding levels over the next 30 years. And we won't necessarily be drawing, in fact we won't be drawing a hard and fast line to say these are in and these are out. That's not our intention at all. It's more that, okay, with more or less this kind of funding level under current settings, extrapolated into the future, these are the kinds of projects that we think should be prioritised. There are probably a bunch of other projects that wouldn't be affordable under that scenario that would have to look at other funding. We'd have to look at funding through some other way or somehow or other increasing the size of the pot. And of course there'll be a map accompanying that as well, because I know that's very important to you all. So that's pretty much it for the presentation today. As I said, it was nice and brief. And you'll see some of the things there that we're looking for any feedback that you may have on. We'll be coming back to you in June with another update and more maps, and in July with the results of that assessment process with the major projects. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Any questions? Oh, here we go. Okay, Councillor Philippina, Darby and Hills.
Tēnā korua. Look, if you can go to the slide that you had, I think, statutory obligations, I think. There was a slide there around, oh gosh, where was it? You mentioned it the same.
At the bars?
Yeah, I think you ended up there with some criteria, some bullet points that you had assessing outcomes.
Not that one?
No,
I think it was.
it was before that one.
Okay, so it might be the very first one.
Strategic outcomes.
Okay,
Yep, that's the one there, sorry.
Yep,
Look, I just wanted to find out whether, why, and I'll be interested in the answer, and you've mentioned Māori outcomes, why there isn't a strategic outcome around honouring, acknowledging the statutory obligations of the Te Tiriti o Waitangi, because they are statutory, and I thought that might be outcomes. I know you've said that they're embedded in the whole document, so that's the first question. I mean, yeah, Hilda.
thank you. So, yes, so that will be part of that kind of Māori outcome specific criteria that I've talked about, that we don't have the expertise to work up, but Ngā Matarai do, and that's, we're working with them on that. Maybe there's a different way of doing it. Maybe it should be it should be one of these five. But irrespective of how we do it, I think you can rest assured that a Māori outcomes lens will be applied both in terms of the experts sitting in the room assessing projects and the moderation process afterwards. Yeah,
I know. Sorry, through you, Chair. I know you're doing the work. You mentioned Ngā Matarai, but it was just to put it in there as a note. So I'll leave that with that one. I think if you go further on, and there was, I think the criteria about excluding some, and there was, I saw one, this particular one, the second bullet point, projects or parts of projects, it's all parts of projects that are confusing me. If the parts of the project have sort of, say, 60% all the way through, will they still be excluded? That's what I'm trying to get my head around when I see that, that's all. Because you're saying that will be excluded if they have already started, but if you're 60% way through of a project, and one of those 1 to 4 criteria there, are you saying it then now becomes excluded? That's what I'm trying to get my head around.
Oh, I think I'm with you, and you've caught us out on our poor use of language there. So if something's 60% under construction, then we assume that it's going to be finished, and we won't be assessing it. But that's not to say it won't, like CRL, for example, that's obviously more than 60% finished, but we want not assessing that, but it'll still be a key part of the future network that we present.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joe.
Councillor Darby.
Thanks, and thanks, Robert. Thanks, Mark. Just in terms of the scope that was outlined in paragraph 17 of the earlier report, it was A to F. Can I take it that that scope is continuing to be adhered to? That is the scope hasn't changed?
The scope hasn't changed. I'll just remind myself of what that paragraph says. Sorry, what paragraph number was it?
It was the previous report. Sorry, previous report.
Previous
was
report,
paragraph
okay.
17, A-to-F. I don't think the scope is identified in this report.
You'll have to remind me what that says.
Okay, so look, I won't go through it all because it's a bit of reading there. But that scope did identify the major projects which you're discussing here today. And the title of it is integrated. I'm just trying to get my head around if the scope is changing or has changed because you're only looking at those large scale projects of, you know, several tens and plus millions and not the lesser ones, because the scope specifically talks about bus network, it talks about the active network. So can you just explain how, or give me some assurance that the scope hasn't changed if you are narrowing down into just the large projects?
So those things will be part of the future transport network and will be represented as such through the maps, but we won't be assessing individual cycling projects or bus priority projects, for example, unless they are of sufficient scale. And in the cases of buses, there may well be projects that are of sufficient scale. In the case of active, we're not aware of anything that meets this criteria. So, you know, things like, I don't know if I should mention this, but I will. The VKT reduction program talks about a BRT light program. You know, that is potentially within scope.
Okay, so I'm just wanting to clarify this. So this particular body of work that you're undertaking is on the large projects, but it doesn't displace the other ones. They will be included in the integrated transport plan in the maps, but we just don't require any further work on them. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, well, so those things have been progressed through other processes, primarily the RLTP.
Yeah.
But we're not proposing to assess, you know, a series of cycle lanes against a 10, 20 billion plus harbour crossing, for example.
Yeah. Okay, they'll show up in the integrated plan once it's formed. I've got that. Okay, that's good to have that. The second question is, part of that original scope talked about provide a view of major transport projects delivered by 2050. This is the ones you're talking about, to meet council's vision. It specifically said council's vision. And then it went on to talk about being aspirational. So can you take us through how are you defining council's vision and aspirational? I'm really searching for something here that is going to transform our transport system, you know, by 2030, 2040, 2050, as opposed to just, you know, ongoing interventions. So how do you define council's vision? What are you tapping into in terms of council's vision? And how are you responding to the word aspirational? It's in the scope.
So we're using council vision in this context in two senses. One is in terms of this being a council-led process rather than a council and government collaboration. So the thing that we come out at the end will represent council's view of the future transport network. The second sense in which we're using the phrase council vision here is around outcomes, and you see very high level articulation of them there. And we would expect if you deliver half of these projects that are on our provisional list, then that will have a very significant, potentially transformational impact on the city. And so I think it's kind of inherent. What you're asking for is inherent to the process. So that was the council vision part of it. And sorry, I forgot the second.
So just picking up on the council vision. So the Auckland plan, the outcomes of the Auckland plan, they are being looked at and being responded through this.
Yes,
because that's our high order council vision, right?
That's right, yes.
Okay, okay, good to hear that's being looked at and followed through. So I'm now searching for how you're responding to the scope where it says aspirational. Now, I view aspirational as not business as usual, not remotely near business as usual. So how is the team taking that and actually reflecting on that and landing on projects that are aspirational to the point of transforming the transport system for Auckland by 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever the date is?
So the detail that sits underneath some of those strategic outcomes reflects council's vision as it currently stands. So on safety, on emissions reduction is one of the obvious ones, on mode shift and land use around a more compact urban form as articulated in the FDS. So it's kind of inherent to that vision is inherent to the assessment process. But as I say, any one of these projects, several $1 billion plus, particularly the rapid transit projects, will have a very significant impact, if not transformational impact, on the city. So combined, the list that we come up with, and subject to your endorsement, will be transformational. And I suppose it's, given where we've got to and over the last decade or two in terms of delivering major projects, it's kind of aspirational in the sense of delivering on any one of these, let alone a huge package of them over a period of time. So I'm not quite sure if I've got to where you're getting at, but I've given it a shot. I'll leave it there. Okay.
Councillor Hills?
Kia ora, Chair, thank you. I had similar questions to Councillor Darby. The beginning of this journey, I felt like there was a lot of point to this integrated transport plan, but I today am maybe further from that. I'm trying to understand what is this going to look like at the end. And the second question that's kind of enveloped within that, we're being told we can't be aspirational for the RLTP because we must fit with the government's GPS and we can't possibly do anything else. But this is now our plan to be aspirational, separate.
Yeah. So as I say, the direction we were given is this is to be work. This is work that will articulate council's view of Auckland's transport future. Okay, it's not bound by the GPS and it's not bound by government's view, either this or any other government's view. So it was to form the basis of our subsequent discussions with government on the actual integrated transport plan. So this is kind of preparatory work. So that's, sorry, what was the second part of your question again?
Well, the first part was I'm getting confused of where we're heading. Like, what is the end result
all right, sorry, yes,
of this going to look like now?
Okay. So in terms of actual tangible outputs, well, as we've set out in the scope, there'll be a series of maps with commentary accompanying it, commentary on the combined impacts of these projects. So I suppose that heads towards the transformational side. We are bound by timeframes here, and so there will be a subsequent, more detailed piece of work, either with or without government, in the months to come, where we'll be able to dig into that in much more detail. But the instructions given to us in terms of the tangible output are reasonably succinct and visually based. So lots of maps with commentary.
Thank you. With the cuts through the GPS and with the mayor saying we should focus on what we've got, not these big signature projects, I guess I'm a little confused, and maybe it's wording about not including smaller projects, cycleways, the renewals spending, when actually some of those bus lanes, for instance, or rolling out cycling faster will have massive benefits rather than these massive projects which will take 15 years. So how are we incorporating, say, a network or 20 bus lanes if they're too small for you guys to look? How is that going to be incorporated?
So this is the criteria for inclusion for assessment, for the actual assessment process that we're going to go through over the next couple of weeks. But that doesn't mean to say that other things are not part of the final picture that we present to you. As I say, they will be. The active mode network, the bus priority network, and so all of which, of course, will have massive impact if rolled out widely on the way in which Aucklanders get around the city.
And last question, Chair, that we've approved the TERP and the Te Tārakia Tāwhiri, and yes, a lot of, there's a lot of ups and downs on what people believe that is, but that really clearly kind of showed what would happen to speed up a congestion-free network and reduce emissions. Are we trying to put that into this plan?
Yes, emissions reduction is and people getting around much more efficiently is critical to our assessment process.
Councillor Turner?
Thank you. Well, nothing's very clear to me when I listen to all that, and I put it together with discussions I've had in other places, but in council, and we talk about vision, but it seems to lead to scope creep, which then leads to cost blowout, and we don't seem to get anything for our money. You mentioned, you did qualify it by saying maybe I shouldn't, but you mentioned a vehicle kilometre travelled reduction program. Is that parked? I thought from our last meeting that was parked. Or is that and other things still idling in the corner and connected tangibly to our decision making? And if so, where do we get it's all very abstract to me.
So the VKT reduction program was resolved by this committee last month, I think, that it was to inform future transport planning processes, of which this is one.
I thought it was put aside as an unfunded policy. Where do we sit on this? Is it active, or is it in bed, or where is it?
We can get the director to get back to you on that one. Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, so that's my question. Like, we have 300 policies told to us about that are sitting around in the background. In another area, in council area, we sit here talking about our aspirational things, but it leads us to a well, please tell me if I can't see through this properly. It leads us to a whole bunch of aspirational decision making, which does not seem to take cost delivery into account. How do we connect cost delivery to that original? How do we start off knowing that the dollar value is an important measure?
I can speak to that, or okay. So yes, as I mentioned, we will be providing some kind of estimate of a likely funding availability over the course of the 30 years, extrapolated from current settings, and certainly that will be used as a guide as to what might and might not be possible. But I mean, more broadly, this is a 30-year vision. If we can't be aspirational for the city over 30 years, then we as officers, I don't think, are quite doing our job. We need to set forward something that will give you the opportunity to consider a much better transport system for Auckland in years to come. So it's, I know some people don't like the word aspirational, maybe that's not the right word to use, but certainly we'll be putting forward a vision of a transport network that is much better than what we've got at the moment.
I'm not trying to be negative, but I do try to tuck in all these other comments that I hear you say. Like at one stage in one of these transport meetings, I heard that we are stuck in a subsidised model, and that every ticket sold for a bus, a train or a ferry increases our deficit. It does not reduce it. So over 30 years, aspirational and dollar value are, I just want to see how in my mind we're bringing those together.
Yeah, of course, every mode of transport is subsidised in one way or another, including roads.
Okay, so I think Director Barry Potter's got the resolution there. Barry, if you could just read that out and maybe just clarify that point.
Thank you, Chair. There were actually 4 resolutions in there. I'll just go through very quickly. First one was receive the findings of the Auckland's vehicle kilometres travelled reduction program. Second one was note that Auckland's vehicle kilometres travelled reduction program sets out the changes in legislation, policy and regulation, transport system, urban form and funding that would be required to achieve a 29% reduction in light vehicles. So set out the funding. The last one, third one, is then if funded and delivered, so the funding wasn't committed. And the final resolution, using the findings of the Auckland's Vehicle Kilometres Travelled Reduction Program to inform Auckland Council and Auckland Transport in their transport, land use and communication. So the findings that are in there, bring those forward, which I think is what you have said, Robert.
Because just for my understanding. So I'm sitting here during that last meeting and listening to the $20 billion we think that the vehicle kilometre transport reduction plan is going to have to bring to us in order to implement it properly. And then I have a sigh of relief as we all say, well, it's not funded, so it's going to be parked over here. And now we're saying that some of those considerations have to be taken by these people because this policy is sitting on a shelf somewhere, but we still haven't talked about the costs that could bring to our decision making. Is that correct?
Mark, you want
Perhaps I could try and clarify a little bit of what this piece of work is trying to achieve. So it's, as Robert has said, it's not conflicting with statutory processes, including the RLTP. So you'll be considering the RLTP, which includes obviously all the proposed bus networks, bus lanes, cycle networks, etc., etc. That is a given as part of this work is concerned. And then this work is looking at existing proposals, which are the strategic transformational projects over and above what's already included in the RLTP over a 30-year period, and bringing it all into one place so councillors can actually see it for the first time as what the future network would look like if those projects were implemented. The work will also state, based on existing funding assumptions, what level of the line that might be drawn against those strategic projects. But it would be incredibly difficult over the next 2 months to design a whole new cycling network, a whole new bus lane network, etc., over 30 years. So we've chosen to focus on the strategic projects and present an assessment against those, which will naturally result in a ranking, which will include cost and funding availability.
Are we going to debate in a moment? Are we when we resolve on this? Just to make comment, or? Yeah. Okay. I just didn't know if my next thing was a question or a debate.
If I could just add one final point, and to that, a critical piece of this work, we believe, also is to present what does the next stage look like with government, or without government for that matter. We've got to get up to a point, this is preparatory work, we've got to get to a point of a 30-year plan as quickly as possible to inform these discussions, and this will only present the initial input into that.
Okay, so I think that the Mayor wants to just make a brief comment because I think he's...
Yeah, I'd like to if you can. I mean, I kicked this off as one of my campaign projects to have an integrated transport plan because we've got plans all over the place and we've got aspirations for saving climates and shoving people on buses and God knows what, and we forgot about freight. The idea of looking at big ones isn't a bad way of going to what I'm trying to do. What we're trying to do is have a series of maps 5 years, 10 years and 30 years. So start with the big ones in 30 years. What I'm trying to do is have, where we're aiming for in the future, to have people moving around and goods moving around in a sensible way. And we're trying to have it so that what bedevils Auckland is new governments shoving new vote-catching projects into the system with no long-term view of is that of value or not of value. And we've already got a couple of ones that everyone's fallen in love with them, but don't seem to fit in any great plan whatsoever. So it's moving goods and people, and you're starting with the big ones, which is fine. I know there's zealots who want to think that everything's going to be on a bicycle, but they're going to fit in around these things. It's not an anti-bicycle, but it is the big flows are supposed to be also go towards where the big groups of people are going to now. And if we are going to have develop certain areas, we should be thinking about that. So you start off with the big things in the future, you're not ruling them out the bits that go with it, and I think it's sensible. So we'll have a series of 5, 10 and 30 years, and every time someone proposes something, we can say, does this fit in sensibly with where we're going? In terms of the costs, there's nobody more hard-nosed about costs than me. And that part of that the whole sector of transport is built around misunderstanding instructions and spending far too much on design before we start building anything and not working out the value of what it is we're doing. Those are bits in terms of how we're going to procure things, but we still should have a map of where we're trying to go. Councillor Williamson is always saying if you don't have a map where you're going, any route will do. And so we need to see what do we think looks sensible in 30 years, and then what steps in 10 years to get to that, and then all the way through we introduce the thoughts of how do we think things cheaper. You will have heard earlier before I quizzed the Waka Kotahi, whatever it's called this week, guy about they have a habit of building so much future into it. We don't build anything now, we just build the future. But we need to have an idea when, for instance, would we need Penlink 2? It might be 50 years away, in which case, why would we bother spending a lot of money doing a double width bridge now? But if it is going to be 10 years away, it makes sense. So that's the point. We're trying to get a map. Your questions about money, that is an everyday question on everything. And yesterday, you'll remember we saw a wonderful picture of a cycleway with and pedestrian, combined cycle and pedestrian way, very happy young children, quite safely, and it was on crushed metal, very cheap, and bits of wood on the other side. So we can do things cheaper and faster and better as well, but we do need to have a map. That's what I think you've been explaining it pretty well, and you haven't quite got it, but you have, and you will eventually. But he's an AT, and they take more training time. I've learnt that already.
All
So,
right, let's
there we go.
move on. Let's move on to the questions. There's probably stuff that's more in the debate. So if people want to debate this issue, we'll save it. I was just trying to help clarify things there. So back to the questions. Apologies for the councillors who've been waiting a while here. Councillors Dalton, Lee, and Bartley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Robert. Point 28 on next steps, it talks about staff seek direction from the AITP political reference group. How often are you meeting and what sort of direction are you looking to them for?
So the political reference group actually hasn't met yet. But thank you for raising the question because it gives me a chance to set out what we think should happen. We think that group needs to meet late this month or early next to look at the results of our assessment, and then we suggest that a full TIC workshop is required prior to the July TIC to consider the same.
Thank you, Robert. I reserve my right to speak to.
Councillor Lee.
I think the Mayor makes a fair point here, but I think Aucklanders would share the bemusement of Councillor Turner, and I appreciate this report presentation is about process rather than actual details, but I hear the word aspirational, hear the word vision, and probably if you use the word vision, this probably suggests inspirational, not necessarily aspirational, but may I ask, given the use of those terms and the strategic purpose of the process, project pipeline, etc., I want to ask two questions, and all I want to save time is a yes or no answer. In this 30-year plan, aspirational, inspirational, vision, or whatever, strategic, is there any reference, as there was in the original Auckland plan, under the Local Government Act, the spatial plan for Auckland 2012, is there any reference to a heavy rail connection to Auckland International Airport, yes or no?
Well, we haven't done the plan yet, yeah, I'm
one
not,
or the other.
So I'm just, yeah, well, we haven't done the plan, so I can't answer it yes or no. Whether it's on the list of projects or not, I'm not sure. I'd have to
Okay,
find out from others.
we'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, councillor Lee. Councillor Bartley.
I reckon whatever it is, it's got to be easy to understand for everybody, because pretty much out there in the public, they just want to see us fix the problems with the transport system right now. So how will this kind of help address that? Or is there another document? Is it the RLTP where we're going to address the problems now? And then how is this different from what we had before with the ATAP, with that 30-year look? So you're just really after, like...
So the here and then now is very much the domain of the RLTP with its 10-year focus. So this, as you've heard, has a longer term focus, but still dealing with a very similar set of problems, but over the longer term. How does it differ from the previous ATAP? Well, the original ATAP back in about 2015, I think, took a 30-year view, kind of. It focused primarily on the first 10, but then it looked out a little bit beyond that. ATAPs since then have not. They've all been focused exclusively on the 10-year. So in that sense, this is a new piece of work. It's something we haven't done, not recently anyway, in terms of a detailed 30-year view of what Auckland's transport network should look like.
And do you reckon, one more question please, and do you reckon you're going to get an accurate picture of that if you're starting off from that monetary limit? Was it 100 million? Because then a lot of the other projects, like a lot in the local board space, have a massive impact on the transport system, but they're under that limit. And then I also see local boards, we're not really going to work with them. Like the work seems to have stopped in terms of consultation.
Yeah, so first of all, the scale of the projects. So we're not assessing those smaller scale projects. Yes, the big ones, we're not assessing them. But we are assuming that they will continue to be a very critical part of the transport network and probably deliver just as much bang for buck as the bigger stuff, if not more. So the final view of the transport network that we present to you in visual and written form will include that. But as I say, we're just not assessing it as part of our process over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Your other question was around local boards, and local boards were engaged quite extensively as part of the first round of the work on the integrated transport plan last year when we were working with government on it. And in fact, there was a really quite long and detailed report produced summarising the feedback that we received from local boards. And I think in the paper that we've got here, it sets out some of the results of it, and it has been on the agenda. It was on your agenda item, I think, back in March when we updated you on this work. So no, we're not undertaking consultation with anyone as part of this initial phase, simply because of time factors. But remember, this is just the preparatory work. The work on the actual ITP, Integrated Transport Plan itself, will happen afterwards, and absolutely there'll be consultation with local boards, with iwi and so on after that, as part of that, I should say.
All right, thanks, Councillor Bartley. I think we'll round off the councillor questioning now. We've got a short one from Councillor Darby and then finally Councillor Williamson, and then if anyone wants to talk to this, you'll be more than welcome.
Yep, thanks. And one last question, Robert, and thanks for confirming the scope hasn't changed. And I note the scope, there were no votes of dissent on the scope, and the scope was specific about responding to council's vision and being aspirational. And I'm just reiterating that because there was not a voice against those words when we confirmed the scope. So just in terms of the scope also asked for non-infrastructure interventions to be addressed. And I understand we have to focus on the projects, the physical projects, but those non-infrastructure interventions are really powerful. And we know demand management tools, and the list is extensive, is the best bang for buck that you spend in transport. So can I just have some confirmation that, we know time of use charging has been progressed. Can I assume that in that mix for you considering those non-infrastructure interventions would be including tolls, it'll be road user charges, replacing fuel excise duties. There'll be other things in that area on how to charge appropriately for freight, which loads up our roads at, a ratio of 10,000 to 1, light vehicle ratio. Infrastructure financing, SPVs, value uplift. Are those and other things in that non-infrastructure intervention category?
Yes, I think you can assume that, but just bear in mind, this will be a high-level piece of work, so we won't be going into any huge amount of detail on a lot of those things. The direction we've received and how we envisage this as kind of that work stream is, it's basically a page or two at this stage. There'll be more detail further down the track as part of the next phase of work, but yes, all those kinds of things, we may not necessarily specifically cover all of them, but those are the kind of things that we're looking at. And there's a second related work stream as well, of course, looking at the current transport planning and funding and governance system and opportunities to improve that as well. And again, that's high level at this stage, but we'll be putting forward some thoughts for your consideration on that as well.
Councillor Williamson.
Yeah, look, just back to Councillor Turner's concern about vehicle kilometres travelled. If you read quite a lot of literature about big companies failing, one of the major things that stands out is they used the wrong measure to work out where they were going. And I know that people around this table are really worried about emissions. And so therefore a really good measure would be, is the plan for the future reducing emissions? Got it. There's others like me who are worried about travel times and congestion. And as we put down, how do we improve travel times and reduce congestion? It's a measure. But what if we had solar-powered vehicles that were autonomous and driving around all day, every day, and dropping kids at school and picking up people from supermarkets and so on without a driver, and the actual vehicle kilometres were twice as much as they are now? It wouldn't be a problem, would it? Surely there'd be no emissions, there'd be lowered congestion levels because of it, and so surely a measure we should be using would be what level of emissions are we pumping into the air by doing this plan? What is the travel time reduction, which is a really good KPI we should be looking at? But vehicle kilometres travelled is look, it probably meant fine when you had horse and cart, but it doesn't mean anything in the future world of technology and transport of the future. And I would have thought that Councillor Turner's dead right. We should just be saying, that's gone, that's from the past. Vehicle kilometres travelled is a meaningless number for the future. There are plenty of good measures, and there can be others, I'm sure councillors will have them, that really do mean something. It doesn't mean anything.
You got a response to that?
Yeah, so I mean, we've heard the resolution around the VKT plan, so it's not my place to relitigate that. But the other measures you mentioned, emissions and travel time savings, that's part of the mix, absolutely, in both cases.
Thank you for that. It's been moved by Councillor Fletcher. I'll second it. I'll put it open to debate now. I think Councillor Dalton, did you indicate a willingness to talk on this?
Thank you. Yes, I would. Thank you. And it actually applies to the RLTP as well, but I'll just speak here and I won't speak again in that. Chair, it is mostly around, this is a 30-year strategic plan. And it's the development of it, and we've got the experts doing that, but then they bring it back to a political reference group. A political reference group is there to provide political oversight. You don't need to be an expert in transport, although I suppose it would be quite helpful. We need to make sure that those political reference groups are representative. This used to be difficult in local board land, and we landed on a model where we would get representatives geographically spread in the most part to try and form an opinion that would represent the whole of Auckland. We've got, and I've spoken to this before, the political reference group here that will be meeting to give direction on where this 30-year strategic plan is going has a geographical bias for a start. There is nobody there, I think, that can reflect the west, the south. but definitely there is a gender inequity, and this is happening a lot in this council. And as I've said before, on our Auckland Transport Board to this point. I want to talk about the importance of having women fairly represented when we are considering making up political working parties, committees, and specifically talking to women in transport. We don't have a system that is fit for purpose for everyone because women have not been designing these strategies or even long-term plans, having a stronger voice. And this has been going on for years. I mean, you can read anywhere in the world, actually, that the transport system has been designed by men, and then women need to fit into it. We need to be working together on it. Women have a different life to men. Speaking of women, I know we have diversity, all sorts of diversity in our city, but I'm going to speak as a woman. We're more likely to walk. We're more likely to take public transport. We're more likely not to have access to a car. Bus routes that we do have fail to address the trip chaining that we do. Doing the school drop-off, then going to work, then going to the shops, then doing what we have to do in the unpaid work. And I'm generalising, but I would say that it's reasonably reflected of a very large part of the woman in the city. So because we have to spend so much time in a system that does not work for us in terms of public transport, in our unpaid work, we are left out of the paid workforce, which makes things even harder for us. We can't participate in paid work as much as we would like to be able to. Personal safety for women is very different for men. The M.R. Cagney report that was done a few years ago, Equity in Auckland's Transport System, where women were surveyed, safety was one of the major reasons why they won't take public transport. And of the women surveyed in that report, the most common, and I'm just going to read a bit here, Chair, because that's from the report. The most common responses to the question, what changes to your city's transport system would most improve your journey? Protected cycleways. Well, that's a bit of a no-go nowadays, isn't it? But it's a reality that people do want out there, and particularly in this survey, women. More frequent, reliable, extensive and connected public transport with longer operating hours. Crime prevention through environmental design improvements such as increased public surveillance and improved street lighting. Prioritise universal design and road safety improvements such as lower speed limits and more road crossings, the very things that are being opposed by this council and by central government. So I think women's voice is absolutely, look, I'll tell you what always comes to my mind, and it was one of the first women elected to Christchurch City Council. And what she delivered in that time, one of the things she delivered in that time was the first public toilets with changing tables and a creche on Christchurch Cathedral. Completely supported by her colleagues. It's not that they didn't want it, wouldn't do it, they just didn't think of it. They just didn't think of it. And that is why women need to be equally represented in the decisions and the plans that we're making. So I'd like to have some assurance that, I'm glad that, I mean, what Robert said was this is coming back to a full tick meeting. That was good, because my concern was that we weren't going to get a really good voice in there, not just gender, but geographically. But let's just have some consideration that there are people who do want things, and that's because their lives are different to others, they have different responsibilities. The system has not been created for them in the past, and now we must pivot, adjust it, whatever the word of the day is, to make it usable. So we do have people with a choice of what mode they wish to travel in, at what time in their particular lives they are at, whether it be the mum with kids, whether it be someone like me who now has a knee that can't let me walk as far as I used to, but I can cycle without pain. And I would like to cycle safely. And I can do that in some places. Thank you, Waka Kotahi, for the cycle lane in the south. But there's no joined up. There's no joined up cycle lanes out my way. And I'm sure there won't be for a while yet. So that's my plea. Please, let's get some equity for the woman's voice in these important decisions that we're making for the 30-year plan, so we get that right for the next women that are coming through. Kia ora. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not trying to stop anyone having input. I'm not trying to stop aspirational thinking over the long term. What triggered my questions was when we talked about the vehicle kilometres travel reduction program and it being non-statutory. All around this place, we're told, don't worry, this is non-statutory, which means it comes with a whole lot of thought, a whole lot of, I don't want to use the word ideology, it's the only one that can come to mind, but it comes with a whole lot of philosophy and no specification. And we get to the end of our projects and we're struggling with cost. And that problem, as far as I can see, is starting at the beginning. So my question was, all these policies which are non-statutory, but we can use them for consideration and guidance, bring subjective decisions inside the bureaucracy. And it's not the same subject, but it's the same matter. The code of practice for stormwater, etc. One person I'm helping at the moment, the council has said to them, it is council's planning and engineering opinion that this is not safe enough. All the statutory stuff, all the controls we put in place, all their decisions, and here we are, we have something where, well, that's not enough. What is enough? What isn't enough? So when I'm listening to us talk about these policies, I get worried because I come back to a meeting a month later and it's morphed. And when I try to challenge it and say, well, hang on, we were on this track. Oh, but that wasn't enough, or that was too much, or so we've morphed to somewhere else. How do we get there? Oh, we're guided by this policy, which is sitting to one side. I just think it's all too fluid and has to be more commercially structured in the beginning. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realise I was on there. Thanks, Chair. Just quickly, this is a non-statutory document, so I mean, if it says what it's going to do, that's great. I do have some concerns if we aren't using last month at this committee, we approved the VKT process unanimously. You know, we should have talked about it then if we didn't want to continue that policy. Same with the TERP, same with the Te Tātakia Tāwhiri. We have to stop confusing our staff and confusing organisations. If we have approved policies in place, they should be followed. And if you do not want those plans to be followed, then put up a notice of motion and try and remove it. But democratically, we continue to approve plans and policies to help our agencies deal with big issues like climate, like safety, and that's the case. So they are in place because we put them there, and we last month voted for that. So I hope, Mayor, this plan does what you want it to, but I'm at this moment sceptical if it doesn't include the wider range of issues that need to go into it, but looking forward to seeing more detail when it comes back. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. I obviously have learnt a lot today, so thank you very much. Where we go in this stuff.
Councillor Bartley.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I note that the recommendation up there is to receive the progress report, and I'm happy to do that. I don't have any big debates. I thank the officers for the work that they're trying to do, and I thank the mayor for what he's trying to do. You know, very practical person, being an engineer, black and white, so appreciate that. The answer isn't always bus transponders, like what you said about us councillors last term, not coming up with that idea because we're not transport experts. So I appreciate the transport experts that aren't sitting around this table. I want to back up what Councillor Dalton said. Thank you for what you said about bloody time, because it's always about a male focus. And, you know, when my local board came here yesterday and they were talking about upgrade Penrose, it wasn't because, you know, I don't know. The reason to upgrade over there is because women were saying that they have to get off the train at that station, at Te Papua station, I think, and walk from there. No, they have to get off at Penrose and they have to walk from there to the Onehunga station, and they're walking at night behind factories. And you're a woman, so you're gonna, you know, I don't know about you men, but as a woman, you're worried that you're gonna get attacked, you're gonna get raped, because you're walking down these dark places. So I absolutely appreciate what you have raised today, Councillor Dalton, because safety using our transport system is very real. So yeah, I just really want to back what she said and thank her, and just I hope some change comes from it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other contributors? I'll maybe just quickly, it's already been moved and seconded. Just a couple of comments by way of conclusion from me then, and I thank all the members for their contributions. I guess the first point I'd make is that we have made a very deliberate choice to bring this plan before the committee of the whole. Okay, so this is the second or third time it's been before everyone, and part of that is to involve everyone. And I can assure people that going forward, there's going to be a full workshop and prior to the actual meeting. So we are trying to involve everyone in this, and we certainly take the points of how sometimes these delegated committees can have an inherent balance. There are two women on that committee, but as it's one that's kind of gone with positions, it has resulted in an imbalance. So we certainly take that point. But hopefully involving the committee as a whole, that we can make sure that everyone is getting their say, because people's experiences are definitely different, depending on where you live in Auckland, depending on what sex you are, depending on what age you are. You can have quite a different experience of this city. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Now, we face a bit of a dilemma here, folks. The Auckland Transport